Good morning. This is Eman Hani, the General Manager of Central Scotland Regional Equality Council, or CSREC for short. I'm also a trustee of Clackmannanshire Third Sector Interface. And this morning I'm joined by Laura Anderson, Senior Manager of Higher Risk Cases and Quality Assurance with OSCR. Laura, good morning to you, and thank you very much for agreeing to take part in this informal conversation as part of Trustees Week.
Good morning. It's lovely to have a chance to join you, Eman. It really is.
That's lovely. And it's our understanding that you've been with the charity regulator since it was established back in 2007. So what was life before this post for you?
Life before coming to OSCR for me was I worked in accountancy practice. I trained as a chartered accountant. I started my career with PwC. Servicing quite a wide variety of mainly commercial clients at that time. After I completed my training, I worked in a specialist team covering mainly occupational pension scheme work for about 12 months. And then I chose to move to a smaller accountancy practice so I could work closer to home in Dundee. And when I moved to the smaller practice, I was pretty much working exclusively with charities and not-for-profit organisations at that time. And I found that I was really, really interested in the different reporting challenges that charities have, and also working with people who weren't purely motivated by money, but people who were motivated by making a difference to other people's lives. And I just found that really inspirational.
That's grand. It's clear that the interest is coming in purely for the charity. So what has been the greatest challenge of your role?
I think one of the biggest challenges that so many of us, if not all of us, face at OSCR is actually sometimes trying to find some quite practical and quite workable solutions to different issues that we see charities of all different shapes and sizes having. A good example of that would be when we try to develop guidance materials for charities, for instance, because the diversity of the charity sector is quite astonishing. You know, the sheer scale and size of some organisations is huge. And yet at the other end of the scale, we have organisations that are very, very small, but are equally working just as hard to make a difference in their local communities. When we're trying to write guidance, for instance, about a particular issue that charities have, and that issue might be something that applies to charities both large and small, we need to make sure that the guidance is helpful and it speaks to the charity no matter what shape and size it is. So the content is very relevant no matter what the shape and size the charity is, and indeed the language is appropriate no matter what shape and size the charity is. That can be really quite a huge challenge to get that balance right. But at the same time, it's a really good challenge to have, and I think it challenges us at OSCR to really understand the different issues and the different complexities that charities experience.
Well, that's a big challenge, as I can only imagine. So you're also you're joint chair of the SORP committee. So what does this committee do?
So we generally refer to it as the SORP committee for shorthand. So that's kind of what I'll refer to it as. So the SORP committee exists to advise the SORP making body as to the development of the SORP itself. So let me start with the basics and unpack that a little bit. So the SORP is the statement of recommended practice. It sets out essentially the accounting rules that charities that are preparing accrued accounts have to follow. Okay, so the SORP itself is essentially an interpretation of UK accounting standards. UK accounting standards are set by a body which is called the Financial Reporting Council. They set accounting standards for all bodies in the UK, regardless of whether they're a commercial organisation or whether they're a charity, a pension scheme, an insurance company, all different things. They set the accounting standards. There are certain specialist sectors that exist in the UK, and charities are one of those. And those specialist sectors have a statement of recommended practice, because pure accounting standards don't always take adequate account of particular transactions that certain specialist sectors like charities have. And so that's why we have a SORP that interprets the accounting standard for the specialist sector and adds in any requirements or any treatments for particular transactions that are unique to that sector. The Financial Reporting Council then recognise certain bodies or organisations as a SORP making body. In the UK charity regulators are the SORP making body for charities. So that's the charity regulators in Northern Ireland, in England and Wales, and indeed in Scotland. So we work as a three-way kind of partnership, if you like, to produce the SORP. The SORP committee are our advisory committee, and they are a committee which comprises accountants and non-accountants, people with auditing experience, people who have academic experience, and kind of people who maybe have funding experience, people who also have different particular experience working with smaller organisations in particular. They advise us as the SORP making body as to what the content and the descriptions and the preparation of the SORP should actually really be like. And that's essentially what we do in that space. So if you're preparing accrued accounts and you're following the SORP, that means you're either a charitable company, and you're a charitable company maybe of very, very small size or very, very large size, or if you're not a company, you're an organisation that is required to prepare accrued accounts because your income is maybe £250,000 upwards. That's when you're using the SORP. If you're a smaller organisation and you're not a charitable company, you're eligible potentially to prepare a simpler form of accounts, which are called receipts and payments accounts.
Right. So does the rules of the SORP influence all the charity accounting then?
The rules for receipts and payments accounts in Scotland are actually set out in law. They're set out in secondary legislation that's been developed by the Scottish Government and essentially passed by the Scottish Parliament. But I think it's fair to say that when those rules were being established, first of all in 2006, there was some regard certainly had to the requirements that SORP set out at that point in time. But of course, the key difference is that if you're preparing receipts and payments accounts, you're preparing them purely on the basis of the transactions that have actually happened either in physical cash or through the bank account of the charity. It's the physical transactions that have happened in the year. Whereas if you're preparing accrued accounts, you're also maybe taking account of transactions which might affect a future accounting period. So there are some obviously key differences there too.
That's quite informative. Thanks very much for that, Laura. Are there any changes to come?
There are indeed, yeah, and I'm really pleased you asked that because there's a big exercise underway at the moment that the SORP making body and the SORP committee are undertaking with the invaluable input and help of a huge number of people and organisations who came forward to work with us as our engagement partners. So I explained earlier about the fact that the SORP has to stay in line with UK accounting standards. That's a requirement that the Financial Reporting Council set down for us as a SORP making body. But when there's going to be a change coming up to accounting standards, and therefore we need to change the SORP, it also means that we have a really golden opportunity to look at particular issues that charities experience with their reporting and their accounting, that perhaps we need to think again about whether the SORP has got the requirements right, or whether they are the most helpful disclosures, for example, that are being included in an annual report or indeed a set of accounts. So what we have done so far as a SORP making body and working with the SORP committee and our engagement partners is to identify 15 quite challenging topics and issues that we think we need to look at again, because either the requirements of the SORP maybe aren't quite right, or they're posing particular challenges, or actually there's maybe just room for some good improvement. So the process that we're going through at the moment is looking at each of those topics in depth and in turn to try and see what the next iteration of the SORP actually needs to say about that particular topic. And indeed, if there are particular quite significant changes that need to be made, then we might also need to have discussions with the Financial Reporting Council about changes to accounting standards that might be required to allow us to make the corresponding changes in the SORP itself. So there's a huge body of work going on there at the moment. The Financial Reporting Council have indicated that the next time that the accounting standards will be changed will come into effect from the very start of 2024. And that might sound like it's a huge amount of time away, but actually when we take into account what process we have to go through to make the changes to the SORP, to go through a consultation and to have that approved through the appropriate channels, that does take quite a lot of time. So that's why we're starting on that now. And we've been in that space now for a good few months, and it's a space that will take us through into the start of 2022 as well.
That's fabulous. Thanks for that. And so where do we get the information on new changes when they come in?
So there's lots of information available on the charitysorp.org.uk website. We publish lots and lots of the SORP committee papers on that website, and there is information about the timeline that we're working to, and also about the 15 topics that we're looking at that I mentioned earlier.
Thanks very much for that. So Laura, you're known for encouraging trustees to really showcase the charity's work in the report section of the statutory accounts. Why is that?
I think that's become a real thing for me, because I'd like charity trustees to be really proud of the work that they do and the achievements that their charities make. The contribution that charities make to society is absolutely immense. And I think sometimes it can be quite surprising and almost quite shocking for people that aren't perhaps so involved in the charity sector to hear about some of the contributions and some of the figures and statistics that we readily talk about sometimes. One of my missions, therefore, I think, has been to help charity trustees to really understand what it is that they can and should be including in their trustees' annual report about the work that they've done in that year, about what they've achieved, and maybe about their future plans for the next year as well. That will help them ultimately to produce an annual report that's more helpful and more interesting, I think. And whether it's maybe a current or a future funder or donor that's going to be reading that, maybe someone that's thinking about volunteering or working for the charity, or indeed a current or a potential beneficiary of the charity. All of these groups of people should be able to read a trustee's annual report and find something in there that is helpful and interesting and useful for them, no matter kind of what kind of different perspective that they have. And I think charity trustees sometimes miss the opportunity that is presented to them in the trustees' annual report just to tell the story of their charity. They're achieving so much, so why not shout really loudly about it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So are there any examples that you personally like, and why?
I have to say I'd probably hesitate to kind of pick out any particular organization, but the things that I particularly love to see are when charities perhaps use photographs or different forms of communication rather than just paragraphs and paragraphs of text. I think it's great to be able to sometimes use maybe a diagram to illustrate maybe a really key message. A photograph can be really effective as well. Just different ways of communicating really key messages that make it very easy for a reader to understand, number one, what that charity is all about, number two, what it's really achieved in the year, and number three, where it might be going in the following year as well. There are lots of different ways to communicate. And sometimes I think charity trustees think that it just has to be quite boring and it has to be the same as it was last year. And actually, I'd say it has to be anything but those things. It has to be fresh and it has to be interesting, because what the charity will be doing from year to year will be different. So why not tell the story of exactly what's going on? Because that will be different year to year. And that keeps the wording and keeps the explanations then different from last year. It keeps it relevant, and therefore it keeps it helpful for readers, I think.
And I couldn't agree more with you, Laura. What are you personally most proud of?
I think really, I mean, this may sound a bit twee, but I think really I'm just most proud of the fact that I have an opportunity to work with OSCR and with charities in Scotland. As I said earlier, the contribution that charities make to society and to people's lives, I find awe-inspiring. I really do, and I don't say that lightly. For me, it's the generosity of the time and the effort that so many people give to charities, whether that's acting as a charity trustee, as indeed you do yourself, Eman, or whether it's people who volunteer their time or their efforts, their particular skills to helping charities deliver particular activities and services. All of those contributions are just fantastic. They really are. I think as the regulator of Scottish charities, we know that it's important for us to understand the challenges that charities have so that we can provide support to charities to deal with those challenges appropriately. And I think for me, one of the things that makes me most proud to work with OSCR and with charities in Scotland is that the hallmarks for me of a modern regulator are about balancing that kind of oversight activity that is traditionally thought about as a regulatory activity with kind of good facilitation, support and improvement. And that's what we strive to do at OSCR. So a lot of the activities that we do are not only about exercising oversight over the 25,000 charities that we have in Scotland, but it's also about helping charities to improve what they're doing. So that's why we focus quite heavily on providing good resources on our website that charities can look to when they need a bit of guidance, a bit of support, a bit of help. We know that many charities experience quite a high turnover of charity trustees from year to year or maybe every couple of years. And that means that there's an unending almost demand for support and different resources out there. And that's a demand that we try hard to meet. It's not always an easy challenge to meet, but it's something that we strive hard to meet. And I think by and large, we do that pretty well, but we're always looking for how we can do it better. And I think it's all of these things together that makes, for me, it just a very lucky position that I find myself in, that I have the opportunity to work with OSCR and, as I say, with the fantastic charities that we have in Scotland.
That's absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. This is Trustees Week, as we all know. And so if there's one thing you'd ask trustees to read or take away from this week, what would that be?
I would say it's don't be shy about telling the story about what your organisation achieves and what it delivers. Don't be shy about telling the story of your charity in your annual report, and use your own words to tell that story, because there's nothing more powerful than using the language that you would generally use to speak to people who want to read your annual report. Keep it fresh, keep it interesting, so that your readers will want to come back next year and find out what happened next. What's the next instalment? What did your charity do this year? Don't be frightened also about telling the story about things that happened that perhaps didn't go to plan and didn't work out quite as you expected, because actually that's human life. And I think the honesty in reporting is something that is refreshing, and that people do find just something that makes them want to come back for more, because there is very little honesty sometimes, I think, that we see in reporting nowadays in all different sectors and different media. So being honest and open about what is going on within charities, I think is really important. So for me, the takeaway thing would be, don't be shy about telling your story, tell it in your own words, and be really open and honest as to what's going on.
Don't be shy indeed. That's been a very insightful discussion and conversation. Thanks ever so much for joining us, Laura Anderson, Senior Manager, Higher Risk Cases and Quality Assurance from OSCR.
Thank you.